Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tales of the Darkness. Lower the lights and stay where you are. If something in your house feels slightly off, don't check it yet. Just listen. Story 1. The Tunnel That Wouldn't Let Go. My name is Daniel, and I didn't just see it that night. I brought it home, and now my hallway never really feels empty anymore. It started as a walk with no plan and no reason, just time to kill. 3 of us talking about nothing. Same jokes, same boredom, nothing that felt wrong at first, nothing that made us stop or slow down. We were heading back when the sound behind us changed, not louder, just closer. And at first it was easy to ignore because footsteps echo strangely in open spaces and your brain fixes things for you. But this didn't fade. It stayed locked behind us, matching our pace, close enough that I could feel it without seeing it. Then the air shifted, not colder, heavier. And that's when I noticed the fog rolling in low and thick, hugging the ground like it was looking for something. There was no wind, no warning, nothing that explained why it was suddenly there. That's when the murmuring started. Not clear words, just fragments. Sometimes it sounded like prayer, and sometimes like laughter, slow and measured, too calm to belong to someone lost. We didn't stop walking because stopping felt like permission. Ahead of us was the tunnel, long and narrow, dark enough to swallow sound, and I remember thinking the open space behind us somehow felt worse. Just before we entered, I looked back and saw the fog moving in waves, and between them something detached itself. A woman, old clothes hanging loose, skin pale enough to blend with the mist. She didn't walk, she slid. No steps, no rhythm, her lower half dissolving into the fog like the ground wasn't meant for her. The murmuring came from her, and then the laughter, switching back and forth, like she was testing which one made us move faster. My body reacted before my mind did, and we ran. Inside the tunnel, the sound changed again. Every breath echoed, every footstep sounded too loud, and the fog followed us inside, thick and close. Behind us, the murmuring grew closer, and then it stopped. And that silence was worse because it felt like she didn't need sound anymore. I didn't turn around. None of us did. We just kept running until the light at the other end started to look fake. When we burst out, we didn't slow down until there were people nearby, noise and movement all around us, and only then did we turn back. There was nothing, no fog, no woman. Just the tunnel opening behind us, still and empty. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. That night, I felt it for the first time inside my house, not a sound but a presence, like the space behind me was occupied even when nothing was there. I kept checking the hallway, the corners, the door frames, telling myself it was nothing, but the air felt wrong, heavy in a way I couldn't explain. Sleep didn't help, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her exactly as she had been in the fog, floating and still smiling. And when I woke up, the feeling stayed, always behind me, never touching. My hallway became the worst part of the house, too long and too quiet, so I stopped turning the lights off completely and started leaving doors half open so the darkness wouldn't gather in one place. Every night the same thought returned. She followed me out of the tunnel, not physically. Something else did, something patient. I started dreaming while awake, seeing movement that vanished the moment I focused on it, feeling watched from places that shouldn't hold attention, the end of the hall, the space between rooms. I didn't tell anyone everything because saying it out loud made it stronger, but someone noticed anyway. They took me somewhere quiet, voices low, hands placed on my head, words spoken like commands, and it didn't stop immediately, but slowly the pressure eased and the hallway felt lighter, not empty, just less crowded. I never went back to the tunnel, and I avoid places like it now, long passages, fog that sits too low. Because some things don't chase you, they follow, and once they learn the way to your home, they don't need the tunnel anymore. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Tales of the Darkness. Story 2. The bracelet I lost twice. My name is Emily, and I lost a bracelet. Then I lost weight. Then I lost color. And after that, I started losing pieces of time without realizing it. It began on a day that should have stayed forgettable. Just a walk with friends, idle conversation, nothing sharp in the air, nothing that felt like it should have followed me home. I noticed the doll first, a doll on the ground near the path, not hidden, not buried, just sitting there like it was waiting for the right eyes, and the face was damaged, not cracked or worn, gouged, with deep marks like someone had kept pressing something into it until the plastic gave up. I stopped walking, and my chest tightened, my mouth dried out, and I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it, but one of my friends laughed and said someone must have dropped it. Then he stepped closer, and without really deciding to, I followed him, like my body didn't trust being left behind with it. The closer we got, the weaker I felt, not dizzy and not sick, just drained, like warmth was being pulled out through my skin and my muscles were turning off one by one. When we reached the spot, the doll wasn't gone, not stolen, just moved, farther ahead, closer to the edge, placed again, and that's when the thought landed in my head, cold and clean, that this wasn't trash. It was a signal, a trade, a piece of plastic for a piece of my soul, and I didn't know I had agreed to it until my skin started to turn gray. I grabbed my friend's arm and pulled him back hard. He complained at first, then he looked at my face and stopped talking, and we walked away without turning around because I refused to give it that. But the pressure didn't lift. It stayed in my chest like a hand that never fully lets go. That night, I found scratches on my body, thin and fresh, in places I couldn't reach properly, and I stood under the bathroom light staring at my skin like it belonged to someone else, trying to invent a reason, branches, a zipper, a rough towel, but nothing made sense. The next day, food tasted wrong. Not bad, just wrong, like my mouth recognized it but my body didn't, and water made my stomach twist instead of helping. Sleep didn't reset me, it erased me, and I would wake up with my arms heavy, my legs sore, my throat dry like I had been breathing through dust. I started forgetting small things, where I put my keys, what I said in a conversation, why I walked into a room, and then the gaps got larger. Moments where I would be standing somewhere and suddenly realize I didn't remember walking there, minutes missing, pieces cut out. People started saying I looked tired, then they started saying I looked sick, and then they stopped saying anything at all and just stared. My skin lost its color slowly, not pale like winter but gray and dull, like someone had turned the saturation down. My lips looked dry even when I drank water. My eyes looked empty even when I tried to smile. And I started feeling cold all the time, not chilly, cold like the inside of a refrigerator. At night I would sit up in bed and listen because the room felt occupied. No footsteps, no voices, just that feeling of being watched from a place where nothing should be. I told myself I was imagining it, and that's when the dreams began, except they didn't feel like dreams, they felt like a second life. In the first one, I was in a familiar house, warm and safe. I recognized the smell in the air and the sound of a distant room, the way shadows sit in corners. And then she appeared, a woman in dark clothing, calm and certain, not dramatic or fast. She took my arm with a hand that felt too cold to be alive. Her grip wasn't tight, but it was final, and she told me we had to go. No anger, no excitement, like it had already been agreed. I tried to pull away, but my body didn't respond, and then another set of hands grabbed me from the other side, warmer and urgent. And a voice said I wasn't leaving yet, and the woman didn't argue. She just held my arm and waited. I woke up gasping, clutching the place where her fingers had been, and the next day a bruise formed there, not dark purple but gray-blue, like cold pressed into skin. The dreams repeated, same woman, same touch, same calm certainty, and sometimes she didn't speak at all. She would just stand close enough for me to feel that cold coming off her. Every time I woke up, I felt worse. My appetite disappeared completely, and I started losing weight. Not slowly, but fast enough that people noticed without being told. My clothes hung wrong. My face looked narrower. My hands too thin. My mother touched my cheek one day and pulled her hand back like my skin had shocked her. She asked if I was taking something, if I was hiding something, if I was doing this to myself, and I didn't have an answer because I was barely there. Then I was hospitalized. Bright lights, quiet machines, white sheets that smelled like chemicals, nurses coming and going, doctors asking questions whose answers didn't matter. Because what scared me wasn't the hospital, it was the hallway. At night, when the door was partly open, I saw her again, the woman in dark clothing walking past my room. Not like staff, no badge, no clipboard, no quick glance inside, just passing once, then again, always at the same point in the night. She never looked at me. She didn't need to. She was checking on something that belonged to her. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, but hallucinations don't have patterns, and she always came when the floor was quiet and the nurses were busy elsewhere. I started keeping my eyes open, fighting sleep, because I knew what sleep brought, the dreams, the hand on my arm, the voice saying it was time. One night I failed and drifted off, and I felt it immediately, cold fingers on my arm, and when I opened my eyes inside the dream, she was close enough that her face should have been clear, but it wasn't. It looked wrong, like my mind couldn't finish it. She pulled gently, patiently, like a fisherman testing a line, and I tried to scream, but no sound came. I tried to move, but my body stayed still, and then the other hands grabbed me again, warm and strong, and the voice said the same thing, not yet. When I woke up, my arm hurt, not bruised or sore, just hurt, like something had been removed, like a tooth pulled without blood. The next morning, the nurse asked why my arm was cold. She touched it and frowned, asked if I had been outside, checked my pulse, and later I heard staff whispering outside my door. Not about my symptoms, but about my temperature, about how it didn't match the room. Days blurred after that, and my mother told me later that I almost didn't make it, but I don't remember the panic. I remember the woman passing my door, trying not to blink, and the sound of her footsteps, soft and controlled, not hurried, not human in the way I expected. Then slowly I improved, not suddenly and not like a miracle, just like something loosened its grip for a moment. I started eating small amounts again. My skin gained a little color, and they said I was stabilizing and sent me home. Everyone acted like it was over, but I didn't. Because I felt empty, like I survived with a missing part, and I would sit in my room staring at the wall and feel the same cold pressure from behind it. The scratches stopped appearing, but the sense of being watched stayed. Weeks passed, and my friends suggested we go back. Same area, same paths. I said no. They insisted, and I went anyway because saying no felt harder than going. When we got close, my body reacted before my thoughts. My legs went heavy, my chest tightened, and I stopped and told them I would wait outside while they went in. I stood alone, staring at the ground, listening to distant sounds and my own breathing, and then they came back running, not laughing or joking, just pale with wide eyes, and they didn't explain because they didn't have to. I looked past them and saw her, the woman, standing still, not chasing, not moving, just present, and behind her, low to the ground, something else sat in the darkness. A second shape watching. I stepped back too fast and stumbled. My hand hit the dirt, and that's when I saw it, a bracelet, thread, worn, dirty, mine. I knew it instantly. I had lost it long before I got sick, long before the hospital, long before the dreams, and it shouldn't have been there. Not clean enough to be new, and not old enough to have been left that long. It looked like it had been waiting. I picked it up, and the fear hit me instantly. Not anxiety, but certainty, the kind that tells you someone is right behind you, close enough that if you turned you would feel cold before you saw anything. I ran, and I didn't look back. Later, in my room, I washed the bracelet and stared at it until my eyes hurt. Because it was mine, there was no doubt. I showed it to a friend, and he went quiet. And then he told me something he had never told anyone, that during the time I was sick he thought he saw me standing in his yard at night. Just standing there, not calling his name or waving, completely still. He stepped outside to check and I wasn't there. But he found something on the ground, a piece of thread, a small item I had lost months before, and he kept it because it scared him and because it didn't make sense. We sat there in silence after that, because neither of us wanted to say the obvious thing, that I didn't only get sick, I went somewhere, and something came back with me. Now, sometimes, when the house is quiet, I feel that cold pressure again, not in the hallway but closer, right behind my shoulder, like a hand hovering, deciding whether to touch. I still have the bracelet, and I don't wear it. I keep it out of sight, because I'm afraid that if I put it on again, the contract will remember my name. If you think a lost bracelet is heavy, wait until you hear what Laura saw through her kitchen window, because this next one is the reason I don't look at glass after midnight. Story 3. The Girl Behind the Glass. My name is Laura, and I didn't fear her face as much as I feared the sound, because she learned it, and once she did, she started using it. The worst part wasn't seeing her out of the corner of my eye, or the way she kept slipping away whenever I turned my head too fast. It was the sound of her nails against the glass. Tap, 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 always close enough to mimic the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I noticed her when I was small, not clearly and not directly, just a little head sometimes, a shadow where a child shouldn't be, hair moving in a spot that didn't quite match the room, and it was always the same, a glimpse, a flicker, a presence that vanished the moment I tried to focus on it. At first I thought it was my imagination, because that's what everyone tells a child, that it's nothing, that it's normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt practiced, like she understood that being seen fully was a mistake and preferred staying half-confirmed. She started showing up during routine moments, times when the house felt loud enough to feel safe. I would be in the kitchen, someone preparing food, normal sounds filling the space, and then I'd catch movement near the glass, not a full body, just a small shape rising and dipping, like someone standing on something just out of sight. I'd turn, and there would be nothing. But the feeling stayed. The air would feel tighter, like someone had stepped closer without making a sound. The day I was alone was different, because a house changes when you're the only one inside, not because it's darker, but because it listens differently, and every small noise becomes a question. I was in the kitchen again, and there was a large glass door looking out onto a small utility area, and outside near the wall sat an old washing machine, plain and round, the kind of thing you stop noticing after a while. I didn't like looking through that glass when I was alone, because it felt like a screen, like something could be on the other side waiting for me to notice it. I tried to ignore it, and that's when the tapping started. Soft at first, tap, 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 not on the inside, but on the outside, and my chest tightened like my body recognized the pattern before my mind did. The taps matched my heartbeat, not perfectly, but close enough to feel wrong. And when I turned slowly toward the glass, she was there. Outside, holding onto the washing machine like it was a game, a small girl, her hair moving when she leaned out, and she smiled, not a child's smile but a copy of one, a smile with no warmth behind it. The tapping stopped for a moment, and then started again, faster this time, like she was testing how quickly she could sync with me. I couldn't breathe properly, and I remembered what my grandmother used to tell me, that if you see something that scares you, you close your eyes hard and don't stare and don't feed it, because when you open them, it will be gone. So I squeezed my eyes shut until they burned and held them that way longer than felt safe, and when I opened them, the glass was empty, the washing machine was empty, no child, no movement, no smile. But the pressure in the room didn't lift, because the problem wasn't that she was visible, it was that she had been there at all. After that, she didn't stop. She returned to the edges of my sight, always the same, a head peeking, a quick movement behind glass, a shadow in a place too low and too small, and the tapping came back at night. Not always on the glass door, sometimes on a window, sometimes on a mirror, always soft and always patient, tap, 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 matching the rhythm of my heart when I tried to sleep, like she was practicing with me, like she was learning how to control the pace of my fear. Other things started happening too. I had a doll that spoke when you pressed its stomach, a cheap toy with a childish voice, and one night it activated by itself, a short phrase, then silence, then again. My parents checked it, pressed it, shook it, tried to make it repeat, but it wouldn't. It only spoke when we were asleep, and it became routine, a soft voice in the dark, a pause, then another phrase. Like something invisible was learning how to speak inside the house. Eventually, my parents removed the batteries, and that should have ended it, but it didn't, because it wasn't the toy, it was the message that you are not alone, even when you close your eyes. Years passed, and I grew older, but the house never felt completely safe. One afternoon, I heard my mother shout, a sharp, startled sound followed by laughter, and she walked into my room smiling like she wanted to prove she wasn't scared, until she saw me lying in bed and her smile dropped. She asked if I had just run past her, and I told her no, because I hadn't left the room, and she stood there too still, like her mind was trying to repair something it couldn't explain. Then she told me what she had seen, A small high window near the bathroom, one you couldn't reach easily, and in it she saw the top of a child's head and small arms lifting suddenly as if to scare her. She thought it was me, until she found me in my bed. After that, my parents started telling me things they had kept quiet. My father admitted he had seen it too, the same small head at the same window, not every day, but often enough that he stopped trusting his own peripheral vision. He also admitted he had heard a child's voice once, not loud but clear, too close to the front door, and when a neighbor knocked, the neighbor later said he heard a little girl answer from inside, a calm voice saying no one was home. The neighbor believed it and replied, and then my parents opened the door and the neighbor's face changed because there was no child inside and no one who could have answered. That was when the house stopped being a child's imagination and became something the adults didn't want to name. I started noticing new details, curtains lifting slightly when no one touched them, faint marks on the glass in the morning like something small had pressed its forehead there, and always the tapping. Sometimes it came in the middle of the night when the house was silent and my heart was already racing. Tap, 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 not demanding but inviting, like she wanted me to look. I learned not to, because the few times I stared too long the tapping changed. It got slower and more deliberate, like she was adjusting to me, like she was reminding me that she could wait longer than I could. There was also another memory that didn't fit until later. Before she began appearing, my parents had taken me to an old religious building with stone corridors and cold air and long halls that made your footsteps sound too loud. I remember running ahead of them and turning a corner and seeing something white moving low to the floor. Not a person, more like fabric, a pale cloth dragging itself and sliding away from my sight. I chased it and turned the corner, but there was nothing, just an empty hall, cold stone and silence, and I forgot about it. Later at home I saw that same white movement through the glass, low and sliding, like something hiding just outside the edge of my sight, and that time I cried and hid until my father came home. For years, I didn't connect those moments, but as I got older I started thinking about it differently, wondering what if that first thing didn't stay there, what if it followed, not as a full shape but as a habit, as a way of moving, as something that learned our windows. My parents tried small responses, prayers and firm voices. They didn't speak to it like a demon, but like a trespasser, something that had wandered in and needed to be forced out. The girl kept appearing, not always, just enough, just predictable enough to keep the house tense. Then one morning my parents saw her again in that high window. The curtain lifted just enough, and my father stood below it and spoke, not softly, telling her this wasn't her home, that she didn't belong to our family, and that she had to leave. He didn't ask, he ordered. Nothing dramatic happened that day, no slam or scream, but something shifted. The air felt lighter and the tapping stopped that night, then the next, then the next. Days passed, and the house started to feel less watched, like something had stepped back, like it had been pushed away. My parents never celebrated because they didn't trust relief. They acted like the moment you relax is the moment it returns. I grew up with that. Even now, I don't like standing near glass at night. I don't like mirrors in dark rooms, and I don't like windows that reflect my face back at me. Because sometimes, when the house is quiet and I can hear my heartbeat clearly, I think about her nails, and I wonder if the tapping really stopped, or if it just learned how to match a slower rhythm. Story 4. It was never there to protect them. My name is Andrew, and the men following them were the least of their problems. because something else was hungry that night, and it preferred the flavor of the hunters over the prey, even if they didn't know that yet. To them, it was just another walk home, the kind you stop thinking about because you've survived it too many times. Two women on the same route they always took, the same silence, the same small talk meant to keep their minds off how empty the road could feel. They weren't reckless and they weren't naive, they were just used to it, and that's what routine does. It dulls the edge and convinces you that nothing happening last time means nothing will happen tonight. The first sign was the sound behind them. Footsteps, not loud and not sloppy, just measured, and they didn't turn around right away because people walk behind other people all the time. But these footsteps didn't drift or pause or fall back. They matched step for step, like someone had learned the exact distance that makes you uneasy without making you run. One of the women glanced back and saw men, more than one, not talking to each other and not laughing, just watching, and that detail mattered, because a group of men making noise is just a group of men, but a group of men moving in silence is something else. The women didn't stop because stopping is an invitation. They walked faster, and the footsteps adjusted, closer, not rushing but choosing, and one of the women whispered that they should split up, not as a plan yet, just a reflex. Because when your body senses a trap, it looks for any crack in it. The road around them suddenly felt less familiar and less forgiving, because darkness becomes different when you know someone is using it, and the men stayed behind them, not beside and not in front, just behind, at herding distance, controlled distance, close enough to be heard, and far enough to keep hope alive. The women tried not to panic, because panic makes noise and noise makes you easier to find, and their breathing changed first, shallow and careful, then their hands changed, fingers curling slightly like their bodies were preparing to fight even if their minds didn't want to. They kept walking, telling themselves the same lies everyone tells. Maybe the men were going the same way. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were overreacting. And then one of the men coughed. Not a sick cough, but a signal, a short sound that said now. They heard it, and their stomachs dropped at the same time, and the pace behind them changed, not faster but tighter, like a net pulling closed, and one of the women whispered again, this time without words, just a sound made in the back of her throat, fear without language. They were about to run, and they were about to split, and they were about to do something that would turn the night into a chase, and then something stepped out of the darkness beside them, not behind, but beside, a dog, black, large, too large to belong to the street. It didn't trot in like a stray, and it didn't wander. It arrived, and it placed itself between the women and the men with precision. No barking and no panting, just stillness. The women stopped without meaning to because the air changed, and it wasn't relief, and it wasn't safety, it was pressure, a different kind, and the dog didn't look at them, not once, not even a glance. It faced the men with its head low and body still, not tense the way a dog defends, but held like something deciding whether there was even a need to defend. The men stopped too, and that mattered, because men like that don't stop for a dog unless the dog is not just a dog, and one of them muttered something under his breath, not a joke, but a nervous sound. The dog showed its teeth, not in a quick flash, but slowly, like it wanted them to understand every detail of what it could do. And the women heard the men shift their weight, heels scraping slightly. That small sound people make when they're preparing to back away without admitting it. The dog took one step forward, just one, and the men stepped back. No argument, and no bravado. They didn't try to scare it off, and they didn't reach for anything. They backed away like they had suddenly remembered something they weren't supposed to remember. Then they turned around and left, not running but walking fast enough to be honest about fear without looking like fear. The women didn't move, because now they understood something worse than being followed. They understood they had been standing on a road where something else already hunted. The dog didn't chase the men, and it didn't bark as they retreated. It didn't even watch them go. It turned instead toward the women and began walking beside them. Same pace, same direction. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to be unavoidable. The sound of its breathing was low and even, not excited and not stressed, just controlled, and the women kept walking because stopping felt impossible. They didn't thank it, and they didn't speak, because words felt like weakness, and the dog kept its eyes forward, never looking at them, as if it already knew their faces and didn't need to confirm they were human. They reached a point in the road where the light from a distant building spilled faintly across the ground, and the women expected the dog to fade back into the dark, but it didn't. It stayed, and its shadow moved alongside theirs like a second set of bodies. One of the women dared to glance at it from the corner of her eye and regretted it immediately, because it didn't look like a normal dog when you stopped assuming it was. Its posture was wrong, too still and too deliberate, like it was wearing a shape rather than living inside it. Its eyes weren't wild and they weren't animal. They were focused, human focus, predator focus, and the woman looked forward again and forced herself to keep walking, her heart trying to speed up while the tapping rhythm of her pulse felt loud in her ears. The dog's breathing never changed, not even slightly, and that's when the women realized the truth that made their fear curdle into something colder, that the dog wasn't escorting them, it was using them, like bait, like a moving line drawn across the road, and whatever it was waiting for wasn't behind them anymore. It was somewhere close enough that the dog had decided to stay. They reached the turn toward their street, and home was close, and the women expected the dog to follow them, but it stopped, dead still, facing the road behind them, not the women, behind, as if something unseen had stepped onto the path the men had just fled. They kept walking, not wanting to leave the dog, but not wanting it near their home either, and they walked faster without looking back. But they heard something, a sound too soft to be footsteps, a wet scrape, like something dragging against the ground, just beyond the reach of light. They kept walking, and the dog didn't move. They got inside and locked the door, not once but twice, and then they stood there not moving, listening to the silence settle back into the rooms. They didn't talk about the men, because that part felt almost harmless now, almost normal. What stayed in their minds was the dog, the way it arrived too cleanly, the way it placed itself like it knew exactly where to stand, and the way it never looked at them, not once. They tried to breathe like the night was over, but it wasn't, because the next thing they noticed was how quiet their home felt. Not peaceful quiet, but occupied quiet, the kind that makes you whisper in your own kitchen without knowing why. One of them went to the window, just a small glance, just enough to prove the road outside was empty, and she stopped immediately, her face going blank. The other woman asked what she saw, and she didn't answer right away. Then she said it very softly, like she was afraid her words could travel back outside, that the dog was still there. They both moved to the window, and the street light outside didn't reach far. It never did, but the dog was visible at the edge of it, perfectly still, facing the road, not looking at their home, but looking behind, like it was waiting for something to come closer. The women stared, and a new fear formed. Because dogs don't wait like that. Dogs get bored and dogs move, but this thing didn't. Minutes passed, and the dog didn't shift or blink in a way either of them could catch, and they stepped away from the window and tried to convince themselves it was done. They tried to do normal things, water in a glass, lights turned on, doors checked, but normal didn't stick, because every time the house fell quiet they heard something else underneath it, a soft sound. Not inside, but outside. A faint scrape like something wet dragging across pavement. They went back to the window, and the dog was still there, and now the streetlight flickered slightly, not like a power outage but like something was stepping into its reach and taking a little of the light with it. They leaned closer to the glass, and the dog finally moved, just its head, a slow turn toward the darkness on the road, toward the place the men had vanished into. They held their breath, expecting to see the men again, but they didn't. They saw nothing, and that was worse, because the dog reacted as if something had arrived anyway. Its posture changed, not defensive but interested, like it had caught a scent, and the scrape outside got closer, still faint and still wet, and then it stopped right at the edge of the streetlight. They stared, waiting for the thing to reveal itself, but it didn't. The darkness stayed dark. The dog lowered its head and began to walk forward, slow and unhurried, not stalking like an animal but approaching like something that knew the other thing would not run. It stepped into the deeper dark where the streetlight couldn't reach, and they couldn't see it clearly anymore, but they could hear it. A low sound, not a growl but something deeper and smoother, like a throat making a noise it wasn't designed to make. The scrape returned, faster now, and then a second sound joined it, a short, sharp drag, like something heavy shifting its weight. They backed away from the window because they didn't want to watch, and watching felt like consent, so they stood in the hallway listening as the sounds outside continued, slow movement and soft scraping. Then the dog made that low sound again, and the scraping stopped. Silence pressed against the window glass, thick and heavy. One of the women whispered that maybe it was over, and the other shook her head without looking at her, because the air inside the house had changed. The hallway felt narrower, and the rooms felt farther away, as if the home itself was waiting. They returned to the window, and the dog was back in the streetlight, standing exactly where it had been before, perfectly still, like nothing had happened. Except now there was something else, a shape on the road behind it, not a body, and not clear, just a darker patch in the dark, low to the ground, like a stain that didn't belong to the night. They stared at it until their eyes watered, and neither of them wanted to say it out loud, because saying it would lock it into reality. The dog turned its head slightly, not toward them but toward the shape, and then very slowly it opened its mouth, not to bark but to breathe, a long controlled breath. The shape on the road moved just a little, like it reacted to that breath, like it recognized the dog, like it was afraid. That detail broke something in them, because they had been afraid of the men, and the men had been afraid of the dog. So what was the dog making afraid now? They stepped back from the window again and didn't sleep that night, sitting with the lights on, listening for a sound at the door. They didn't hear a knock, and they didn't hear footsteps. They heard something else, a soft, slow scratch, not at the door but at the window, a faint sound like a nail testing the glass. One scratch, then another, then a pause, then again, like something outside was learning the shape of their home. They didn't move, and they didn't look, they just waited for morning, because they didn't know what else to do. When light finally filled the street, one of them forced herself to check outside, and the road was empty. No dog, no men, no stain. But near the edge of the streetlight's reach, there was something on the pavement. Marks, deep scratches, not like a dog's claws, too long and too straight, like something heavy had been dragged there. And beside the marks there were footprints, not paw prints but footprints, bare and large, pointed at the toes in a way that didn't look right. They led to the streetlight and then stopped, as if whatever made them had stood there for a long time, watching. And if that wasn't enough, there was one last detail. At the base of their front door, pressed into the dust where the weather never fully reaches, there was a single mark, a line like a nail dragged slowly across the wood from left to right, careful and patient. Not a warning, a reminder that the dog didn't scare something away, it only fed first. Closing Tales of the Darkness. This concludes tonight's stories on Tales of the Darkness. If you're still listening, it probably means the silence around you hasn't felt empty for a while, and that's usually when it starts. These stories don't end when the video does. They linger in familiar rooms. They repeat sounds you recognize. They stay quiet until the moment when the lights go out and nothing seems to move. So tonight, pay attention to doors you don't remember opening, to sounds that feel a second too close, to those quiet moments that seem to be listening back. If you want more stories like these, make sure to subscribe to Tales of the Darkness, because new stories arrive regularly, and they always know when you're alone. Good night. Some things don't need to be invited, they only need to be noticed.